The light at Gibson's throws a warm sheen over every polished surface, but the laughter feels cold where I'm sitting. A row of candles trembles along the head table gold against mirror glass, and I am not there. I'm 3 tables back with distant cousins, the clink of their silverware answering the question I'm trying not to ask. Amanda sweeps past in ivory silk perfumed like gardenias, one hand floating over the walnut banister as if she owns the room. When she reaches the microphone, she smiles wide enough to catch every flash. "Thank you all," she says, glancing over the sea of faces, and thanks to my sister Penny for funding tonight's dinner. She might not be much to look at, but her bank account sure is pretty. Laughter skitters across linen like spilled beads. My water glass hums in my hand, steady as my face tries to be. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever been treated like you didn't matter, hit that like button, share this with someone who'll understand, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. It helps more than you know. But to understand how that laugh found me in the back of the room, you need to know where the numbers began. I grew up in Winnetka, under a roof the color of old pewter, with shutters my mother had repainted every other summer to keep the neighbors impressed. Our driveway curved like a half moon, big enough to fit every holiday's worth of cars and every quiet exit I never made. My father kept his cuff links in a velvet box on an oak dresser and his pride at the country club. My mother kept her calendar full and her worries hidden behind flawless lipstick. I kept other things, ledgers, passwords, statements no one wanted to read as long as the balances went up and the dinners never disappointed. I was never the ornament. Amanda was. She walked through high school halls like a sparkler on the 4th of July, trailed by invitations and easy applause. I was the one who learned markets by the glow of a desk lamp and underlined articles while the house exhaled after midnight. When I graduated and landed a job downtown, my parents nodded like they did when the lawn service finished a perfect diagonal useful tidy, not the point of the party. At first, it was small things. "Penny, can you look at our portfolio?" "Penny, your father's friend Gerald has been managing it for years." I opened the files and saw the dust gathering even on the gains. 6 months later, the quarterly report would not lie for anyone returns, strong fees, trimmed risk, hedged like a garden. My father blinked at the numbers over Sunday coffee and said the compliment he could handle. "Well, this is unexpected." From there, the accounts multiplied. Trusts, sub-accounts, insurance, wrappers, ladders, collars, and all the careful keys that made it hum. The money was theirs in name and mine in motion. They lived at the front of the parade. I walked 2 streets over, moving the route. When Amanda got engaged to Jackson Taylor Hotel Fortune, old Chicago name, my mother's voice turned to champagne, even on Monday mornings. June, at the Peninsula, she announced, setting down a glossy folder like a contract with fate. 500 guests, Amanda said, a smile like a spotlight. Minimum. The budget started at 300,000, then 4. Then it's just one more line item with petals flown in from Holland and place cards thick as coasters. Anytime I asked where the ceiling lived, my mother smoothed the air with a hand. "This is once in a lifetime, dear." I learned to keep my questions in a neat stack and my contributions in clean transfers. 100,000 left my world for hers with one keystroke. The only person who seemed to notice the tilt was Maya, sitting across from me with a paper cup hot enough to leave a ring on the table. "They're treating you like an ATM with legs," she said, not unkindly. "When was the last time you did something just for you?" I didn't have an answer that sounded like a life. The first flinch came at a seating chart, meeting the ink still wet on a layout that did not include my name at the head table. My mother pressed a finger to a cluster of circles and frowned at aesthetics. "Jackson's family needs proximity," she said. "Optics matter." The second flinch came outside a boutique on Oak Street when Amanda suggested hair extensions to match the bridesmaids. "All the girls have long hair," she said lightly. "You'll throw off the photos." I laughed because it was easier than asking why I suddenly felt like a smudge they were trying to crop. Then came the dinner at Gibson's, the night the room leaned toward the head table, like flowers to a window. The host guided me to a chair 3 tables back, the linen cool under my palm, the centerpiece smelling faintly of citrus and cut stems. Amanda's college roommate, Brittany, 5'0" and golden as a champagne label, sat near the front and waved with a curl of fingers. When the salads cleared and Theodore Taylor rose to speak, his voice carried a kindness that didn't belong to our show. He asked politely about my work, and for 10 blessed minutes, the conversation turned to ideas and prudence and why patience is a hard discipline to sell. I saw Amanda's smile strain a little, the way a ribbon tightens when it's pulled too hard around a gift. "Enough shop talk," she said brightly. "Seating arrangements are more fun." I found out about the demotion between the coat check and the stairwell, where the light hangs yellow like old honey. "I've decided to make the few changes," Amanda murmured, as if we were discussing napkins. "Brittany will be maid of honor." The words floated there absurd as a snowstorm in July, and somehow just as cold. Why, I asked, not because I needed to hear it, but because some part of me still believed reason had a place in our family. "Balance," she said, eyes sliding toward the head table. "Jackson is 6'3". Brittany photographs better beside the best man." She patted my arm like I'd asked for an aspirin, then drifted away on a current of laughter and camera flashes. I ate what I could manage. Fork, knife, napkin, muscle memory. When the toast came for family supporting family, I lifted my glass and heard my father's chuckle near the microphone. Then Amanda's line fell into the room, soft as a match and just as capable of burning. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it covered every inch of me. After dessert, I found my parents near a wall where the wood paneling glowed with old polish. I asked for a moment. My mother glanced at the tailors, then at the clock that wasn't there. "Make it quick," she said. I told them about the seat about the maid of honor title traded for a better angle. My father shifted uncomfortable, as if his collar had shrunk an inch. "It's Amanda's day," he offered, as if that were a law of nature. "The photos will last for generations," my mother said, her hand brushing a non-existent wrinkle from her dress. When I said very quietly that I might withdraw my remaining support, my father's face moved from bored to interested in one heartbeat. "That would be selfish," my mother whispered. The word hung there heavy and familiar. We drove home in 2 cars under a sky polished thin by the city lights. The house smelled the way it always does at night. Lemon oil, cold stone, a trace of last winter's smoke caught in the fireplace brick. I still took off my shoes at the front mat out of habit. Amanda appeared in silk pajamas with a grin she thought was disarming. It was one joke, she said, leaning in the living room doorway like we were friends after a minor mishap. "You're being sensitive." I looked at the mantel where family photos stared back with all their frozen certainty. Her prom dress, my graduation cap, a Christmas tree that had felt heavier every year we dragged it in. "You've always been our numbers girl," my father said, the phrase worn smooth by use. "Our lifestyle is family money." Except I knew the pattern in the accounts, the spine of every transfer. My name was the hinge. "Check the statements," I said, surprised at the calm in my voice. "See where the deposits come from." My mother's smile went flat. "Apologize to your sister," she replied, as if the conversation had been a dish we could scrape into the trash. "Tonight," and my father added no more threats about funding. "If you can't be supportive, perhaps you shouldn't attend the wedding." The house went still after that, the way a room does when a storm passes but hasn't yet moved on. I sat on the edge of the old guest bed upstairs and listened to the heat kick on the vent, giving its usual thud before the soft rush of air. My hands lay quiet on my lap. The only light came from the hallway nightlight, an amber square on the carpet we used to measure our height against with pencil marks and dates. Somewhere below, A floorboard complained under my father's steps, then settled. I thought of Maya's question over coffee. When was the last time you did something just for you? I thought of how the laughter at dinner had found the hollow place in my ribs and lived there like a stone. I thought of a spreadsheet on my laptop that could speak in a language my parents refused to learn. In the dark, I could see the coastline of another choice. It looked like a blank ticket and a quiet morning and a door that opened without asking permission. It sounded like the zipper on a suitcase moving slow enough not to wake anyone. It smelled like ocean air I'd never let myself buy. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed 2, then 3. Each note, a drop of silver falling into a still pool. I stood and smoothed the bedspread with both palms, as if I were ironing out what I couldn't say. The suitcase in the closet clicked when I lifted the handle, a sound barely louder than breath. On the hallway wall, our family photos watched me pass. I didn't look back. The wheels of my suitcase made almost no sound as I rolled it across the hardwood floor. The air in the hallway felt thick, as if the house itself sensed what I was about to do. Downstairs, the grandfather clock ticked through its slow rhythm, and every second seemed louder than the one before. I paused at the top of the staircase and listened nothing but my father's faint snore and the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I moved carefully, one step at a time, holding my breath each time the wood creaked under my weight. The moonlight through the front windows caught the glass frames on the wall. Our smiling faces lined the staircase, holidays, graduations, milestones. All those pictures of a perfect family, curated like an advertisement, none of them showing how it really felt to be the one holding it all together. When I reached the foyer, I hesitated for just a second before opening the door. The brass handle felt cold in my palm. I looked back once at the stillness of the house, the marble floor, the vase my mother bought in Italy, the faint scent of her perfume in the air. Then I stepped out into the night and closed the door behind me. The Uber driver, a woman about my mother's age named Gloria, greeted me with a soft good morning. Her smile was kind, but she didn't ask questions. I was grateful for that. As the car moved through the empty streets of Winnetka, I watched the familiar landmarks slide past the bakery where Amanda and I used to get muffins before school, the park where I once studied in the grass while she rehearsed for cheer tryouts. Each place looked peaceful in the early dark, untouched by the tension I was leaving behind. At O'Hare, the lights were bright enough to sting my tired eyes. I went through security in silence, my heart steady, but my mind racing. In the quiet of the airport lounge, I opened my laptop and entered the first layer of passwords. My contingency plan had always been theoretical, an escape route for emergencies I never believed would come. Now, each line of code and authorization form became an act of self-preservation. The system I had built over the years was intricate, layered like an onion. Most of it required my personal authorization for major withdrawals or transfers. All I had to do was flip the switches. I set notifications for every attempted access and froze the accounts one by one. Checking savings, credit lines, trusts, all temporarily suspended for review. The process was methodical, almost soothing in its precision. By the time the first boarding call sounded, the sun had begun to edge above the horizon, painting a thin line of gold across the runway. I turned off my phone for the flight, knowing that when I turned it back on, nothing in my world would look the same. 23 hours later, the humid air of the Maldives wrapped around me like a blanket. The ocean stretched endless and blue beyond the dock, so clear I could see fish flickering beneath the surface. A young man carried my suitcase to the boat while I stood still, letting the sunlight warm my face. "First time here?" the captain asked as we sped toward the island. "Yes," I said, watching the horizon shimmer. "First time doing a lot of things." The villa waited like a secret at the edge of the water, all white wood and glass. The sound of the waves below the deck was softer than I imagined, almost like breathing. Inside, the room smelled of coconut and salt. I set down my bag and opened the curtains wide, letting the light flood in. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating or anticipating anyone else's needs. My phone buzzed on the desk screen, lighting up with a flood of notifications. 55 missed calls. Dozens of messages. The first few were confused. "Where are you? We need to talk." Then came anger. "What have you done? This is illegal." Then panic. "The florist says our card was declined. The venue is threatening to cancel. You're ruining everything." I scrolled through them once, then placed the phone face down. The quiet that followed was almost sacred. The next morning, I woke to the sound of seabirds and sunlight spilling through the windows. My body felt heavy with exhaustion, but my mind was clear. I brewed coffee, sat on the deck overlooking the water, and watched the surface ripple with silver light. Every breath came easier. Around noon, the phone rang again. I knew that voice immediately. "Where the hell are you?" my father barked. His tone was pure authority, the one he used when the world refused to bend for him. "Somewhere beautiful," I said. "Taking a much-needed vacation. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "We can't access any of our accounts. The wedding vendors are threatening to pull out. Your mother had to borrow money from a friend just to buy groceries." "That sounds difficult," I said quietly, similar to how I felt when I was demoted from the wedding party and laughed at in front of 60 people. "This isn't a game, Penny. This is our family's money you're playing with." "No," I said. "It's my money. I've been managing and growing it for years while everyone else took it for granted. The accounts are frozen for review. Nothing more, nothing less." He fell silent. I could hear the click of his jaw through the phone. "You can't do this," he finally said. "I can. Check the documents you signed. Everything's within protocol." "The wedding is in 3 weeks," he shouted. "Then Amanda might need to make some adjustments," I replied. "Most people do when they can't afford what they planned." He tried a different tone than the soft one that always came before manipulation. "We're sorry if we hurt your feelings. We didn't mean what we said. Are you sorry I asked, or are you sorry that the money's gone?" The silence that followed was answer enough. I ended the call. For the next 2 days, the messages kept coming, turning from anger to pleas to threats again. I ignored them all. The sky stayed a clear, impossible blue. The water below my deck glowed turquoise at noon and deepened to violet by dusk. I swam until my muscles ached, read books I'd never had time for, and slept with the windows open, letting the sound of the sea fill the room. By the 3rd day, even the guilt began to fade. I wasn't punishing them. I was protecting myself. They had mistaken my generosity for duty and my silence for consent. I was simply correcting the record. That afternoon, Maya's name appeared on my screen. Her voice came through the line, full of warmth and disbelief. "You actually did it," she said. "You really left." "I did," I said, smiling into the sunlight. "Well, Chicago's buzzing," she laughed. "Your sister had a meltdown at the bridal shop when her card was declined. Someone filmed it for social media. She's trying to spin it as a misunderstanding. The wedding's been downsized, moved to the country club." I leaned back against the railing, the sea breeze lifting my hair. "I didn't mean to cause chaos," I said. "Chaos was already there," Maya replied. "You just stopped funding it." We talked for a while about nothing and everything, the color of the water. Her latest surgery, the novel I was finally reading. When the call ended, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: companionship without obligation. Later, as the sun began to sink, I sat on the deck and watched the sky turn shades of gold and rose. A text appeared from a number I didn't expect. Ethan, just checking that you're okay. Things are messy here, but I'm worried about you. I stared at the message for a long moment, surprised by the warmth that rose in my chest. I typed back slowly. I'm safe. Taking time for myself. Thank you for asking. A few seconds later, his reply arrived. Good. You did the right thing, Penny. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here. It was simple, kind, without agenda. I put the phone down and let the silence wrap around me. The water below shimmered in the fading light, endless and forgiving. That night, I dreamed of my father's study, the shelves full of ledgers I used to organize the faint smell of cedar and ink. In the dream, I wasn't small anymore. I closed the books one by one until the room was quiet. When I woke the next morning, the sky outside was a pale pink, and the tide had risen high under the deck. The air smelled of salt and rain. I poured another cup of coffee and opened my journal, something I hadn't written in since college. I froze the accounts I wrote, but what I really did was unfreeze myself. I didn't know what the next weeks would bring. Maybe more anger, maybe silence. But for now, I had water, sunlight, and peace. The kind that doesn't need anyone's permission. Outside, the sea kept moving, slow, steady, and alive. Somewhere far away, my family was waking up to another day of consequences. I thought of them without hatred, only with a quiet kind of clarity. Freedom, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just exhales. The days slipped into one another, softened by the rhythm of the tides. Each morning, sunlight spilled through the sheer curtains of my villa, and the ocean below whispered against the stilts. I would make coffee, open my laptop, and watch the blue horizon brighten as I checked the quiet notifications that arrived like small echoes from home. Every attempt my parents made to access the frozen accounts appeared on my screen, each one a reminder of boundaries they were learning, perhaps for the first time in their lives. On the 5th day, my father called again. The tone that once filled every room with authority now carried fatigue. We've had to make some difficult decisions, he began. The wedding's been scaled back. Amanda's struggling with the changes. His words sounded careful, as if he were stepping through a minefield of pride and embarrassment. I imagine she is, I said, keeping my voice even. He sighed. The Taylors have questions about our finances. It's humiliating, Penny. I thought about the years I'd swallowed humiliation in smaller doses. Dismissive comments, laughter at my expense, quiet sacrifices mistaken for duty. I know that feeling, I said softly. There was a pause before he spoke again. What do you want from us? Just tell me what it will take to make this right. The question lingered heavy and unguarded. For the first time, he sounded like a man asking, not commanding. I looked out across the water where a fisherman's boat drifted far beyond the reef. I want what I should have had all along, I said. Respect. Acknowledgement. Not when it's convenient, but as a constant. I'm not a resource to manage. I'm part of this family. He didn't argue. There was only the sound of the ocean through the phone, a low, steady hush. If we can agree to that, I continued, then when I return, we can discuss new terms, something clear, something fair. All right, he said after a long silence. We'll talk when you're home. After the call ended, I set the phone down and sat very still. I hadn't realized until that moment how long I'd been waiting to speak to my father as an equal. Not his assistant, not his daughter, in need of approval, just a grown woman stating her worth. That afternoon, I joined a snorkeling group that circled the coral gardens beyond the lagoon. Beneath the surface, the water felt like a dream I had forgotten I could enter. Schools of fish flashed silver and yellow, moving together in perfect rhythm, each creature keeping its space without colliding. The balance of it struck me. Every life there knew its boundaries, and the beauty came from that understanding. Later, while drying off on the deck, I thought about how families should work the same way, how imbalance creates chaos, how giving without limits erases not only fairness, but love. For the first time, I saw my decision not as punishment, but restoration. Evenings were slower. I'd watch the sky turn from gold to violet and fall asleep to the sound of waves striking wood. But on the 10th night, my phone vibrated with an unfamiliar alert, an incoming video call request from my parents. I hesitated before answering. Their faces appeared side by side on the screen, the familiar living room behind them. My father's hair looked grayer, my mother's expression drawn. "You look rested," my mother said, trying to sound casual. "I am," I said. "How are things in Chicago?" "We've made adjustments," my father said, his tone even. "Guest list down to 150. Venue changed to the country club. No imported flowers, no drone show. It's manageable now." "Good," I said, leaning back in my chair. "That sounds like a wedding, not a parade." Amanda entered the frame for a moment, her eyes red, her tone subdued. "I wanted to say, I know things got out of hand." My mother touched her arm as if to guide her. "Your sister has something she'd like to say." Amanda hesitated, then exhaled. "I'm sorry, Penny. I shouldn't have treated you that way. I shouldn't have humiliated you. You didn't deserve that." The apology wasn't perfect, but it was real. I saw the flicker of something fragile in her eyes, understanding, maybe even remorse. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you think. I don't expect things to be okay overnight," she continued, "but I'd like to fix what I can." I nodded, feeling a quiet shift inside me like a door opening, just enough to let in air. "We'll start small," I said. "A new arrangement, clear boundaries, and no more assumptions." They all agreed. It was a strange, almost tender moment. After the call ended, I sat in the fading light and listened to the soft hum of the ceiling fan. The air carried the scent of salt and something faintly sweet frangipani blossoms that drifted across the deck each evening. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt ready to go home. 2 days later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Amanda. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual brightness. "Jackson almost called off the engagement," she said. "He found out about the rehearsal dinner and how I treated you. I guess Ethan told him." The mention of Ethan's name caught me off guard. "I'm sorry it came to that," I said, unsure what else to offer. "I am, too," she admitted. "But it made me see how I look to everyone, how I've been living for approval that doesn't mean anything. I'm trying to change." Her honesty startled me. "That's a good place to start," I said. She gave a small laugh. "You always were better at starting over than I was." After the call, I sat with the phone in my hands, the screen still glowing faintly. I thought about Ethan's quiet decency, the way he'd looked at me that night when everyone else laughed. I remembered his message, simple, thoughtful, with no demand attached. It had felt like an anchor dropped gently in calm water. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the horizon, I opened my laptop for one last task. The accounts, once sealed like vaults, were reopened in part. I authorized limited transfers to cover the modest new wedding budget. Each confirmation tone felt lighter than I expected, as if I were releasing something heavier than money. When it was done, I closed the computer and stepped out onto the deck. The moon rose full and low over the ocean, scattering light across the water. The tide had come in higher than usual, washing softly against the stilts. The air was warm and still. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling peace instead of regret. The next morning, Maya called during her hospital break. "I've been keeping up with your sister's updates," she said with a wry smile. "Looks like the wedding survived after all." "It did," I said. "A smaller version, but maybe that's better." "Smaller isn't always worse," she said. "Sometimes it's where you find what matters." I smiled. "You sound like my therapist." She laughed. Maybe she and I would get along. We talked about ordinary things, the weather back in Chicago, a new restaurant she wanted to try when I got home, her latest patient who'd insisted on giving her a homemade pie. When we hung up, I realized how long it had been since I'd let a conversation end without worry. As the last few days in the Maldives unfolded, my routine changed subtly. I began setting my alarm again, easing back into structure. I wrote notes in my journal, ideas about independence boundaries, even a plan for a new kind of financial firm that could help people like me. People who'd been made to feel small around money that was theirs to control. One evening, while I sat on the edge of the dock with my feet in the water, another message came through from Ethan. "Heard about the new plans. Glad things are calming down. When you're home, can we have coffee?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, smiling before typing a simple yes. That night, the rain came suddenly sweeping across the ocean like a gray curtain. I watched from inside as lightning flashed far away, illuminating the line where sky met sea. The sound of it was cleansing, the kind of storm that leaves the air sharper and the world quieter. When morning came, the sky was clear again, washed pale and new. I packed my suitcase, slowly folding each piece of clothing with care. Before leaving, I stood on the deck one last time. The waves shimmered beneath the early sun, calm and endless. I whispered a quiet promise to myself: no more building comfort for people who mistake kindness for obligation. As the boat pulled away from the island, I looked back once. The villa stood small against the horizon, a speck of white over turquoise water. It felt less like an escape now and more like a beginning. I turned my face toward the wind and let it carry the salt across my skin. Ahead lay the long flight home and a family learning to live without control. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the landing. The plane touched down in Chicago under a gray morning sky, the kind that blurred the city's edges and softened its noise. As the cabin doors opened, the air felt heavier, colder, but grounded like reality waiting to be met. I moved through customs quietly, the wheels of my suitcase whispering against the tile, and when the automatic doors slid open, the chill met me full in the face. It wasn't harsh. It was familiar. The skyline rose ahead, sharp and silver in the distance. I watched it through the car window as we crossed the bridge into the city. Every building looked exactly as I'd left it, but the view didn't sit the same way in my chest anymore. This time, I wasn't returning to fix anything. I was coming back to start something of my own. When the driver turned into my parents' neighborhood, I asked him to stop at the corner rather than pull into the driveway. I wanted a moment to walk. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and the faint trace of someone's chimney. My childhood street looked unchanged, perfect lawns, brick facades, porch lights still glowing in daylight. But I wasn't the same woman who had driven away in the dark 3 weeks ago. My mother opened the front door before I reached the steps. She looked smaller somehow, her posture careful, her smile practiced, but uncertain. "You look different," she said, searching my face as I stepped inside. "I feel different," I replied. My father stood from the armchair in the living room. The last time I'd seen him, his voice had been raised full of old authority. Now, it was quiet. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, hands clasped together, "about how we treated you, how we've taken advantage without even realizing it." My mother nodded, eyes flickering toward the floor. "We were proud of you," she said softly, "but we never showed it in the right ways." Their humility was strange to witness. I didn't rush to forgive them, but I listened. The silence in the room felt fragile, like the pause between tides. "I've made new financial arrangements," I said when they'd finished. "You'll still have what you need, a comfortable life, stable accounts, but there will be limits. Transparent access, not open doors." My father nodded slowly. "That's fair. More than fair considering." Before I could reply, the door creaked again. Amanda stood in the doorway holding a small bouquet of pale roses. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, no designer dress, just jeans and a soft gray sweater. "Penny," she said quietly. "You're back." I hadn't expected to feel anything, but her voice broke through something I didn't realize was still locked. I nodded. "I am." She crossed the room, and before I could brace for it, wrapped her arms around me. Her embrace trembled. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything. For the way I treated you for the wedding, for that night." When she stepped back, her eyes were damp. "The wedding's tomorrow. It's not what I planned, but maybe it's better this way." I studied her for a moment. "How are you feeling about it?" "Relieved," she said, almost laughing. "All that pressure to be perfect, it was exhausting. Now it's just about us, the people who matter." That was the first time I'd ever heard her say anything like that. I felt something loosen in my chest. "That sounds like a real wedding," I said. She hesitated, then smiled. "Will you help me get ready? Not as the maid of honor, just as my sister." The request caught me off guard. I didn't answer right away, just let the quiet hold the weight of it. Then I nodded. "I'd like that." The next morning dawned clear sunlight pouring through my curtains. I dressed in a simple navy dress and met Amanda at the country club where the ceremony would take place. It was smaller than her original plan, 150 guests instead of 500. The garden had been trimmed and decorated with local flowers, their scent sweet and light on the air. The entire scene felt grounded, human. Amanda stood by the mirror, adjusting the lace on her gown. The dress was simple now, elegant, not ostentatious. "I can't believe how calm I feel," she said, watching her reflection. "It's like I was chasing a version of myself that didn't exist." I handed her the veil, smoothing the edge as I pinned it into her hair. "Maybe that version needed to fall apart," I said gently. She looked at me through the mirror. "You sound like Maya. She's a good influence." I smiled. We both could use more of that. The ceremony began just before noon. Sunlight filtered through the oaks as the guests stood and music played. Jackson waited at the altar, his expression soft and steady. When Amanda walked down the aisle, I watched her not as the rival I'd once felt I was, but as my sister, finding her own center. Her voice shook slightly during the vows, and when Jackson squeezed her hands, her whole posture softened. I sat in the third row between Maya and Ethan. The warmth of their presence beside me steadied me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. When the ceremony ended, the applause felt different. No roar of performance, just honest celebration. At the reception, Amanda found me near the buffet table. She took my hands in hers. "Thank you for coming," she said. It wouldn't have felt right without you here. The wedding is beautiful, I told her. You look happy. I am, she said, glancing around the room. And not just because of Jackson. Because of what this all showed me. Her voice lowered. I didn't like who I was. The wedding, the image, it was all about being seen. But you showed me how to stand on my own. I wasn't trying to teach anyone anything I said. Maybe not? She smiled faintly. But you did anyway. You ran off to the Maldives and froze the accounts. That was, honestly, the most courageous thing I've ever seen. I laughed, despite myself. It wasn't courage. It was necessity. Well, she said, squeezing my hands, it worked. You got through to all of us. Later, as music filled the hall and couples danced under string lights, I stepped outside for air. The evening had cooled the wind, carrying the scent of cut grass and champagne. Ethan joined me after a few minutes, hands in his pockets. Beautiful night, he said. It is, I replied. He looked out over the golf course, where the last of the light had faded. You did something incredible, he said quietly. Most people would have broken under that kind of pressure, but you turned it into peace. I didn't do it alone, I said. Maya, the Maldives, a few tough conversations, and maybe the ocean had something to do with it. He smiled. The ocean's good at perspective. We stood there in comfortable silence until Amanda called us back inside for the cake cutting. When I glanced at Ethan, he offered his arm, and I took it. By the time the last guest began to leave, Amanda and Jackson were still on the dance floor, barefoot, laughing. My parents sat nearby, talking softly with old friends, their faces relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. The edges of everything that once felt sharp were rounding, smoothing into something that resembled peace. When the night ended, Amanda hugged me again before leaving. You'll come by tomorrow, she asked. We're leaving for Italy the next day. I will, I said. After the lights dimmed and the last car pulled away, I stood alone under the oak trees strung with fairy lights. The air was cool against my skin, the world finally quiet. I thought of how far we'd all come from that night at the rehearsal dinner, how a single act of defiance had unraveled years of silent resentment and rebuilt something stronger in its place. The wind rustled through the leaves, gentle and steady. It sounded a little like forgiveness. When I reached my car, Ethan was waiting beside it, leaning lightly against the door. You ready? He asked. More than I've ever been, I said. He smiled as we pulled away from the country club. The headlights traced the long road home where new beginnings waited in small, ordinary ways. Dinners, conversations, choices made without fear. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was driving away from something. I was driving toward it. The morning after the wedding, the city woke in a wash of soft gold. Sunlight filtered through the blinds of my new apartment, scattering over the hardwood floor like ripples of honey. The air was still carrying only the faint hum of traffic along the river. I stood barefoot by the window, a cup of coffee warming my hands, and watched the reflections of boats drift slowly past. It had been 3 weeks since I'd moved in. The apartment wasn't large, but every inch of it felt honest, floor-to-ceiling windows, quiet light, clean lines. It was the first place I had ever chosen purely for myself, not for proximity to anyone else's expectations. Even the scent of fresh paint felt like a promise I had finally kept. On the dining table lay a small stack of paperwork documents finalizing the restructuring of my family's accounts. For years, those ledgers had represented control and obligation. Now they represented boundaries. Each page signed, sealed, and clear. No more hidden debts, no unspoken strings. The numbers balanced, but more importantly, so did I. The night before Amanda and Jackson had left for Italy honeymoon postponed, but not diminished. Before they departed, she stopped by the apartment with a box of pastries and a long, wordless hug. "It feels good to start fresh," she'd said quietly. "You taught me that." Her smile carried none of the gloss it used to, only gratitude. For the first time in our lives, we were two grown women standing eye to eye, not competitors circling the same orbit. Later that afternoon, Ethan arrived at my door with a plant of fiddle-leaf fig in a clay pot. "Every office needs something alive," he said. "Consider it company for all those spreadsheets." I laughed, setting it near the window where the light pooled brightest. We cooked dinner together, the kind of simple meal that didn't require talking to fill the air-grilled vegetables, fresh bread. A bottle of red wine opened without occasion. When the dishes were done, we sat on the balcony overlooking the river. The city glowed below us, each building a flicker of movement and memory. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed behind his head. "You ever think about how far you've come?" he asked. "Sometimes," I said. "But mostly, I think about how far I let myself go before I stopped." He nodded quiet for a while. "Still," he said, "eventually it takes a certain kind of courage to rebuild without bitterness." "I don't know if it's courage," I said. "Maybe it's just peace, the kind that comes when you stop trying to be loved the wrong way." He looked at me, then eyes warm. "Whatever it is, it looks good on you." The sound of the river filled the silence between us. Down below, a late ferry passed under the bridge, its lights casting brief reflections against the water. It felt like the city was breathing with me, steady, unhurried. A few days later, I opened the doors to my new office for the first time. Montgomery Financial Advisors. A name that once would have felt heavy with family history, now felt like freedom. The space was small but elegant, filled with soft light and fresh air. Maya was there carrying a bouquet from the hospital gift shop. "Who knew you'd finally put your name on the door?" she teased, placing the flowers on my desk. "Who knew it would feel this calm?" I said. She looked around approvingly. "You're going to help a lot of people here, especially women who've been told they're supposed to apologize for being capable." "That's the plan." I smiled. "Teach them how to keep their money and maybe themselves safe." When she left, I spent the rest of the afternoon setting up small details, the scent of sandalwood candles, the rhythm of my own footsteps in the empty room, the steady hum of a new computer warming to life. There was no audience, no family watching, just me. As the months unfolded, life found its rhythm again, simpler but richer. Ethan and I began sharing weekends between our apartments, cooking slow breakfasts and exploring the quiet corners of the city that tourists never saw. My parents adjusted to their new reality with surprising grace. My father took up golf again, though, without the pressure of sponsorships or social climbing. My mother started volunteering at a local library, her tone gentler when we spoke. Every month we gathered for dinner, not out of habit, but intention. No hidden agendas, no talk of inheritance or appearances. Just shared meals, conversation, and sometimes laughter. Those evenings still carried edges of awkwardness, but they were real. I no longer entered the house braced for disappointment. Amanda visited often after returning from Italy, her confidence quieter now. She'd started a small consulting venture helping local businesses with branding. Nothing glamorous, she'd said, but it feels good to build something that's mine. She even began helping me manage the social side of my firm, her old world of charm, finding new purpose in something meaningful. Watching her learn humility was like watching spring push through frost. One Sunday afternoon, she came by my apartment with a framed photo from her wedding. We stood together by the window as she handed it to me. It was a candid shot, her laughing Jackson looking at her sunlight on their faces. In the background, I sat at a table with Maya and Ethan smiling. "You should have this," she said. "It's the only picture where we all look like ourselves." I placed it on a shelf near the fiddle leaf fig, now taller and thriving. Maybe that's because for once we were. She nodded. I'm trying to be better, Pin. I know I said meaning it. By the time summer arrived, my firm had grown steadily through referrals and word of mouth. Clients came in carrying stories that sounded like fragments of my own. Divorces, inheritances, businesses built from nothing. They came looking for advice, but often what they really needed was permission to reclaim something they'd been told to surrender. Some evenings after the last client left, I'd sit by the window of my office watching the lights of the city shift to evening tones. The skyline shimmered across the river just as it had that first morning. But now it felt like a companion rather than a cage. One particular evening after closing up, I walked along the riverfront. The air was warm, filled with the smell of rain on concrete. The sunset painted the water in layers of amber and violet. I passed couples holding hands, joggers, families out for ice cream. Life moved around me, ordinary, imperfect, beautiful. When I reached the railing by the bridge, I stopped. The wind lifted my hair, and the river below caught the fading light like glass. I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who bent her life around everyone else's needs. I could still feel her somewhere inside me, not as a ghost, but as proof of how far I'd come. Ethan's voice echoed softly in my mind. You rebuilt without bitterness. He was right. I hadn't needed revenge, only peace. I stayed there until the first streetlights flickered on one by one, their glow stretching across the water. Everything around me felt quiet and alive. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from silence but from alignment, when every piece of your life finally sits where it belongs. Somewhere behind me, church bells began to chime the hour. I turned toward home, the sound following me through the warm evening air. Peace, I realized, wasn't something given. It was something you decide to keep. If this story found its way to you, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever had to stand your ground with grace, I'd love to hear how you found your peace. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about quiet strength and second chances. Thank you for listening, and may you find calm in your own way, just as I did.